A game character can have 8 million polygons, individually rendered eyelashes, and skin realistic enough to show the blood beneath it, and still feel completely dead. Another character can be made from a few simple shapes, speak only a handful of lines, and somehow feel like a person you have known for years. So what creates that difference? For Chinese game developers, the question has become especially important. Chinese games now travel far beyond their home market. Players around the world meet immortals, martial artists, opera performers, historical generals, rebellious monkeys, and futuristic lovers through a screen. But putting a jade ornament on a fantasy hero does not make that hero Chinese. Giving someone a Tang-style robe does not give them a past, and scanning a human face does not give it a soul. The phrase, skin in the game, usually means having something personally at risk. In video games, however, it has a second meaning. A skin is the surface we buy, admire, and display. But a character who feels real needs more than a beautiful surface. They need history in their posture, personality in their movements, relationships that constrain them, and values that become visible through play. Today, we are looking at characters from games such as Black Myth, Wukong, Genshin Impact, Naraka, Blade Point, Honor of Kings, and Love and Deep Space. Not to rank the most attractive designs, not to decide which character is the most authentically Chinese, but to ask a more useful question: when pixels become a body, what makes us believe that somebody lives inside? Skin in the game, what makes a Chinese game character feel real? The first mistake is to confuse realism with graphical fidelity. Photorealism can reproduce pores, wrinkles, fabric, and light. It can make a face look like a photograph. But human beings do not experience one another as photographs. We experience timing, hesitation, attention, contradiction, and intention. Think about a friend entering a room. Before they say anything, you may know whether they are angry. Their shoulders are too still. They place their bag down more carefully than usual. They answer a simple question half a second too late. None of those details requires 4K resolution. They require behavioral coherence. A believable character creates the feeling that their actions come from an invisible interior. We believe there is a cause behind the gesture. The character does not simply perform an animation, they appear to make a choice. That is why stylized characters can feel more alive than realistic ones. Stylization removes visual noise and exaggerates the signals that matter. A guarded posture, a proud turn of the head, the rhythm of a fighter's steps, or the way a shy person avoids direct eye contact. For a Chinese character, cultural realism works the same way. It is not a checklist of dragons, lanterns, red fabric, calligraphy, and bamboo. Those are symbols. They can contribute to a design, but symbols become meaningful only when they connect to behavior and context. A robe should affect movement. A weapon should imply training. A title should change how other people speak to the character. A festival should activate a memory rather than merely decorate a menu. The test is not, does this look Chinese? The test is, could this person have become who they are inside this world? Consider Black Myth, Wukong. The game's protagonist is the destined one, a monkey warrior living in the enormous cultural shadow of Sun Wukong. That distinction matters. He is not simply a digital copy of the Monkey King. His identity is built around inheritance, absence, and the question of whether a legendary role can be recovered or escaped. Before the story explains any of this, the body begins the argument. The character is humanoid, but never merely a man wearing monkey makeup. He lowers his center of gravity. His movement can appear disciplined in one moment and animal-like in the next. The staff is not a decorative reference to Journey to the West. It determines distance, rhythm, defense, and attack. This is the first rule of embodied character design. Anatomy, history, and mechanics must agree. If a character has trained with a spear for 20 years, the weapon should not look like an object they discovered 5 minutes ago. If they grew up in a mountain village, their balance, clothing, hands, and tolerance for rough terrain can all reveal that history. If social rank requires controlled behavior, even anger may appear through restraint rather than shouting. Chinese performance traditions offer a particularly rich vocabulary for this approach. Opera, martial arts, folk dance, puppetry, and classical painting do not simply supply costumes, they contain systems of movement. A raised finger can indicate delicacy, authority, or a character type. A circular path may express control differently from a direct line. The angle of the wrist, the speed of a turn, and the placement of the feet can carry meaning. But borrowing movement is not the same as copying it. A stage gesture designed to reach the back row of an opera house may become too large in a close-up game camera. A real martial arts form may need adaptation to deliver readable timing and responsive combat. Good design preserves the logic of the source while translating it into another medium. In other words, authenticity is not a museum display. It is successful transformation. Now look at clothing. Chinese-inspired game design often faces two opposite dangers. The first is generic ancient China, flowing sleeves, gold trim, a jade pendant, and no clear time, place, occupation, or social class. The second is visual overload, every phoenix, cloud, knot, flower, and auspicious symbol placed on one character until the design becomes a cultural catalogue. A believable costume answers practical questions. Who made it? Who can afford it? Is it ceremonial or ordinary? Has it been repaired? Does the character dress for labor, combat, performance, seduction, mourning, scholarship, or government service? Which details were chosen by the character and which were imposed by society? This is where silhouette becomes important. At game speed, players often read the overall shape before individual details. A broad armored shoulder creates a different personality from a long narrow line. Heavy boots imply a different relationship with the ground than cloth shoes. Wide sleeves affect both elegance and danger. Hair ornaments can communicate age, marital status, profession, fantasy rank, or rebellion against all of those categories. In Genshin Impact, Yunjin demonstrates how design can connect costume to occupation. She is an opera performer from the fantasy region of Liu. Her clothing does not attempt to reproduce one historical opera costume exactly. Instead, the designers combined references from Chinese opera with the visual language of the game, and with clothes a young person might plausibly wear away from the stage. That choice tells us two things at once. Yunjin belongs to a performance tradition, but she is not trapped inside it. She is also a working artist with friendships, tastes, curiosity, and a private self beyond her public role. Her design feels real not because every detail is historically literal, but because the mixture expresses her central tension: tradition and youth, discipline and individuality, public performance and private life. That is what a strong costume does. It does not merely tell us where a character comes from. It tells us what they are negotiating. Then comes the voice. Localization discussions often treat voice as a question of accent. Should a Chinese character sound Chinese in English? But accent alone can quickly become caricature. The deeper issue is social sound. How formal is this person? Do they speak indirectly? Are they educated, rural, aristocratic, young, bureaucratic, theatrical, military, or online? Do they use proverbs? Do they hide emotion behind politeness? Do they become more local when talking to family, and more standard when talking to a stranger? Real people code switch. They change vocabulary, rhythm, volume, and even personality depending on the relationship. A person speaking to a parent may not sound like the same person speaking to a subordinate or an enemy. Yunjin offers a famous solution to a difficult problem. Her ordinary dialogue and her operatic singing are performed by different specialists. The production did not ask a regular voice actor to imitate an art form that requires years of technique. The character's voice literally contains collaboration between game performance and opera performance. That decision makes her feel culturally grounded, but it also reveals something about character design. Sometimes reality requires accepting discontinuity. A single perfectly smooth voice might be less truthful than two voices representing two parts of a life. Translation must also protect character intention. A literal translation can preserve dictionary meaning while destroying status, humor, or emotional restraint. Chinese dialogue may leave a subject unspoken, depend on a form of address, or express care through practical concern rather than a direct declaration of love. If localization replaces every quiet implication with an explicit sentence, the audience receives the plot but loses the person. The goal is not to preserve every word. It is to preserve what the character is doing with those words. Western character writing is often summarized through individual desire. What does the hero want? That remains important in Chinese stories, but it is often incomplete. Many Chinese characters are shaped by relational identity. Who are they a child to, a student of, responsible for, indebted to, loyal to, or trying not to disappoint? This does not mean every Chinese character must be obedient or family-centered. Quite the opposite. Rebellion becomes meaningful only when the relationship being resisted has weight. Sun Wukong is memorable not simply because he is powerful. He collides with hierarchies, heavenly bureaucracy, religious authority, master and disciple, freedom and discipline. His personality exists in conflict with systems that try to name, rank, control, or transform him. A modern character may confront different systems: examination pressure, family expectations, urban competition, gender roles, workplace hierarchy, regional identity, or the obligation to care for aging parents. The setting does not have to be contemporary for those tensions to feel recognizable. Fantasy can translate them. A cultivation sect may function like a school, company, family, and political institution at once. A master's approval can carry affection and authority. A sworn brotherhood can create duties stronger than law. A ghost story can express unresolved obligations between generations. This is why lore alone does not create depth. A biography page might say that a character is loyal. A scene becomes convincing when loyalty costs them something. The character misses an opportunity, protects someone they resent, tells a lie, or obeys an order they know is wrong. Reality begins when values produce consequences. No recent Chinese game demonstrates the power of micro-behavior more clearly than Love and Deep Space. Its appeal is easy to describe superficially. Attractive men, polished 3D models, romantic scenarios, and direct interaction with the player. But attractiveness may capture attention without sustaining attachment. At the 2026 Game Developers Conference, the game's art director discussed treating each romantic lead as if he were a real person and asking a deceptively simple question. If it were him, how would he do it? Even an ordinary action, such as tying a towel, could be performed differently depending on the character. One person might secure it carefully. Another might make it neat. Another might wear it loosely, practically, or with deliberate flirtation. This is an excellent design lesson because the action itself is almost meaningless. What matters is variation governed by personality. When hundreds of small decisions point in the same direction, the player begins to predict the character. Prediction creates the illusion of an inner life. We think, of course he would do it that way. The character has crossed an important threshold. He is no longer a collection of authored scenes. He has become a model inside the player's mind. Intimacy also depends on imperfection. A romantic character who is always kind, always available, always eloquent, and always focused on the player may satisfy a fantasy for a moment, but perfect attention can feel mechanical. A believable person needs rhythms that are not entirely controlled by us, private concerns, awkward responses, bad timing, boundaries, and emotional blind spots. This creates an unusual challenge for romance games. The product must make the player feel chosen, but the character must appear to have a life beyond choosing the player. Too much independence, and the fantasy becomes frustrating. Too little, and the lover becomes a customer service interface with excellent cheekbones. The most convincing design lies between those extremes. Games have an advantage that films and novels do not. They can turn personality into a verb. In Naraka, Blade Point, a character is not defined only by biography, costume, and voice. Mobility, attack range, defensive options, team role, and risk all shape how that character feels in the player's hands. A reckless hero should not become cautious the moment gameplay begins. A patient strategist should not solve every problem through frantic button presses. A character associated with graceful movement should not control like a heavy machine, unless that contradiction is intentional. This relationship between control and identity is sometimes called embodiment. Research on avatars suggests that intuitive control can strengthen the sense that an avatar's movement is an extension of the player's own body. Customization can also strengthen identification because the player invests choice into the figure on screen. But cultural embodiment goes one step further. Suppose a martial arts character is said to redirect force rather than meet it directly. The player should experience that principle through timing, positioning, or counters. Suppose an immortal cultivator gains power through patience and preparation. The game should reward those behaviors. Suppose a general's identity is based on commanding others. Their most important ability should not feel like a random explosion. Mechanics are arguments about character. Every cooldown says something about dependency. Every animation says something about confidence. Every vulnerability tells us what the character cannot control. When story and mechanics disagree, players feel the fracture even if they cannot name it. When they agree, the player does not merely observe the character's values. For a few minutes, the player performs them. Now we arrive at the uncomfortable side of skin in the game. Cosmetic skins are one of the most visible ways Chinese games package culture. A character may receive an outfit inspired by a dynasty, ethnic textile tradition, festival, artifact, opera form, or museum collection. This can create real value. Artists research techniques that many players have never encountered. Games can introduce traditional patterns to a massive audience. Collaborations can direct attention toward craftspeople, museums, and regional cultures. Naraka, Blade Point, for example, has used its cultural development program and collaborations to connect weapons, costumes, and visual designs with Chinese heritage. But cultural visibility and cultural understanding are not the same. If a textile tradition becomes a rare costume without explaining its community, process, or meaning, culture risks becoming luxury texture. If sacred or ceremonial symbols are detached from context, a design may be beautiful while still being shallow. If minority cultures appear only as exotic visual resources, the game celebrates their patterns while erasing their present-day voices. There is also a commercial contradiction. Developers may spend months researching a heritage design, but the final object is still sold through scarcity, gacha mechanics, seasonal pressure, or status competition. Cultural pride becomes part of a monetization loop that does not automatically make the result cynical. Commercial art can be careful, respectful, and educational. Traditional culture has always changed through markets, fashion, performance, and popular entertainment. The important questions are more specific. Who participated in the design? Who is credited? Does the game identify the source tradition? Are living communities treated as collaborators or merely as reference material? Does the character's behavior carry the culture, or does the meaning disappear when the costume is removed? A skin can open a door. It should not pretend to be the entire house. The debate becomes even harder when games use real historical figures. Honor of Kings has repeatedly faced criticism for transforming people from Chinese history and legend into fantasy heroes. Timelines change. Relationships are invented. Occupations, genders, weapons, and personalities may differ radically from conventional accounts. Critics worry that young players may confuse game fiction with history. That concern is not imaginary. Games are memorable, and an exciting visual identity can replace a weak classroom memory, but strict historical obedience cannot be the only standard. Historical figures already reach us through layers of storytelling: opera, novels, television, folklore, state education, local tradition, and political interpretation. Guan Yu, for example, is not only a man from the late Han Dynasty. Across centuries he became a literary hero, religious figure, symbol of loyalty, and popular icon. Which version is the real one? Academic research on Honor of Kings found that the game substantially reconstructed actions and social relationships while often retaining core judgments associated with its characters. That is a useful distinction. A game may change what a figure did while preserving what the culture remembers them for. The question is not simply whether creators changed history. Adaptation always changes history. The question is whether the change creates meaning or only marketable novelty. Turning a poet into a fighter may produce an imaginative argument about language as power, or it may simply attach a famous name to an unrelated ability set. One is interpretation, the other is branding. A responsible game can signal the difference between history and fantasy, offer optional context, and encourage curiosity without turning play into homework. Authenticity does not demand obedience. It demands accountability for the transformation. Perhaps the greatest threat to a believable Chinese character is the idea that there is one correct way to look Chinese. China contains enormous regional, linguistic, ethnic, class, and generational differences. A person from Harbin may not sound or move like someone from Guangzhou. A Shanghai office worker, a Sichuan cook, a Tibetan herder, a Hainan craftswoman, and a Beijing university student do not become interchangeable because they share a national category. Yet global entertainment often compresses Chineseness into a narrow visual code. Pale skin, black straight hair, red and gold clothing, restrained emotion, martial arts skill, and vague ancient wisdom. Chinese games can reproduce the same compression, especially when trying to create designs that international audiences recognize immediately. Recognition is useful. Stereotypes are efficient visual tools because players understand them quickly, but efficiency has a cost. Once every scholar is calm, every warrior is honorable, every beauty is delicate, and every elder speaks in proverbs, characters stop being people and become categories. Specificity is the cure. Give the character a hometown, not just a nation. Give them an occupation that leaves marks on the body. Give them a relationship with food, weather, money, family, and language. Let a futuristic Chinese character exist without wearing traditional motifs in every scene. Let an ancient character be petty, funny, badly dressed, ambitious, physically ordinary, or wrong about their own culture. Representation becomes convincing when characters receive the right to be unrepresentative. No individual should have to carry an entire civilization on their shoulders. So how can we tell whether a Chinese game character truly feels alive? Here are 6 tests. First, the silhouette test. Can you understand something about the character before seeing color, ornament, or facial detail? Their body shape, balance, clothing structure, and equipment should already suggest a way of living. Second, the movement test. Does the body appear to have training, habits, age, weight, and limitations? Could another character perform the same animation without anything feeling wrong? If the answer is yes, the movement may be too generic. Third, the relationship test. Does the character change around different people? A real personality is not one stable performance. It is a pattern of variation across intimacy, authority, rivalry, duty, and fear. Fourth, the mechanic test. Do the rules allow the player to enact the character's identity? If the story describes patience but the gameplay rewards constant aggression, the design is speaking in two voices. Fifth, the cultural consequence test. Are cultural elements connected to choices and constraints, or are they removable decoration? Tradition becomes real when it offers power, creates obligation, causes conflict, or shapes desire. And sixth, the contradiction test. Can the character surprise us without breaking? A loyal person may feel resentment. A confident fighter may fear irrelevance. A traditional artist may love modern music. A romantic ideal may be selfish in one precise, believable way. Contradiction is not inconsistency. It is often the strongest evidence of depth. The rise of Chinese games has created a new stage on which China imagines itself, and on which the rest of the world encounters those imaginations. That opportunity comes with pressure. Every successful Chinese character is asked to represent something larger: a mythology, a history, a national industry, a cultural tradition, or a modern generation. But characters feel real when the burden of representation becomes personal. The destined one carries the shadow of a legend. Yun Jin negotiates between public tradition and private youth. The fighters of Naraka, blade point turn cultural movement into playable rhythm. The romantic leads of love and deep space become convincing through tiny differences in ordinary behavior. And the heroes of Honor of Kings remind us that cultural memory is always being rewritten, sometimes thoughtfully, sometimes carelessly, and never without consequences. The future of Chinese character design will not be won by adding more symbols to the costume or more polygons to the face. It will be won through observation. How does this person sit when nobody is watching? Which word do they avoid? What obligation makes them angry because they know they will still fulfill it? What does their body remember that their dialogue never explains? And when the player takes control, what kind of person does the game ask them to become? That is the real meaning of skin in the game. The skin attracts our eye, the design gives us information, the story gives us a past. But behavior, relationships, and consequence create the feeling that something is at stake inside the character. A believable Chinese game character does not need to explain China. They need to want something, owe something, fear something, and move through a world specific enough to resist them. When all of those layers agree, we stop seeing a model built from polygons. We see a person making a choice. Which Chinese game character feels most real to you? And is it because of their appearance, their voice, their story, or the way they feel in your hands? Tell us in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more stories about the design, technology, and culture behind the games changing how China is seen. Thanks for watching.